Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. I request all of you to please be on your seats so that I can proceed the session. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now commence the fifth session of the regional dialogue. The greatest barrier in the fight against climate change is inadequate financing. Therefore, this vital session on climate financing covers the key challenges and hurdles of climate finances as well as an assessment of the loss and damage fund and ways to build resilience. The speakers will focus on key issues of climate financing, the future of loss and damage fund, risk financing, public and private sources of financing. I now request the chair of the session, Ms. Kashmala Kakahil, Specialist Climate Finance, and the first speaker of this session, to kindly proceed to the stage. I also request the speakers to take their seats. I now request the session chair to give her introductory remarks and take over the proceedings of the session from here. I would like to remind and request everyone to please keep their phones on silent mode during the session. Over to you, Ms. Kashmala Kakahil.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum ji. I was just informed that I also have to chair the session, so please excuse me if there are glitches in terms of proceeding forward. So I just wanted to put it out there. Thank you very much to the panelists who have joined us here to talk about an issue which is very close to my heart, because we talk about climate change in abstract. We speak about problems all the time. We need to understand that there is a solution space, and the solution space really starts when we start talking about where the money is and how we're actually going to start using it. So before I come into a further conversation around what my thoughts are, and I will interject as we go forward. Nadeem Saab, General Nadeem Saab, Asghar Nawaz Saab, he's had an illustrious career with NDMA in many other facets. He's been working very closely understanding the loss and damage conversation that was developing internationally at the UNFCCC level. Sir, thank you so much for being here. I want to start off from the issue which generally when we talk about climate finance, we think is Pakistan's problem. We are impacted by climate change and therefore we need to be compensated for it. From that lower tier, I want to start this discourse before we actually go to the more nuanced conversation around mitigation, energy transitions as we go down the line of the panelists. But sir, if you could just help us understand, lay out where Pakistan always is the victim, but at the same time, how do we take the conversation that's developing internationally on loss and damage, and how do we benefit from it going forward?
Thank you very much, Kashmala. It's a pleasure to be here today, ladies and gentlemen. Loss and damage is a subject which has got a lot of relevance for the developing country. It has a history of struggle for almost over 3 decades, right from the time that the conversations started on the platform of UNFCCC. It's imperative for me to first, just define what is loss and damage. There are a number of definitions that we talk of, but UNFCCC defines it as the harm which is caused by the negative effects or the adverse effects of the climate change. And to elaborate it further, where the adaptation or the mitigation fails, there is still a residual risk which is unavoidable and it is death. And that is that unavoidable risk which causes a loss and damage. And for countries like Pakistan, which are unfortunately geographically positioned in a region that they are continuously affected by the effects of climate change, which are felt pronounced as against to the degree or the percentage of emission that they accrue. And this aspect assumes an added importance. So now, loss and damage in the climate conversations had always been linked with adaptation by the developed country. That was the politics of how it is. And in the international negotiations, the definitions, the interpretations, the phrases are very important because that is how they are interpreted when you need to gain something. Let me just, give you a very brief account of evolving of this concept of loss and damage. As I told you that earlier, it started off in the first climate change conversation, where the small island states, raised this issue, and they hinted out at having some sort of a mechanism for compensation against the vulnerability that they were facing. This was vehemently, opposed, rejected, and contested by all the developed countries because they thought that it will open a door for a liability and compensation on their part. Because in climate change, there are two distinct positions, one of our developed countries and other developing countries, with developing countries apportioning the blame on the developed countries for all the mess created so far because of their industrialization and the growth and, disturbing the equilibrium of climate because of the extensive emissions that they develop. So it was bluntly taken out of the agenda of the conference at that time. However, there was a constant pursuance by the developed countries, and in 2011, Bangladesh was able to again bring it. Actually, the word loss and damage came into the climate negotiations somewhere in 2007. And 2011, Bangladesh again brought up a subject for compensation against the effects of climate change. It was again parried, kept off the table. However, in 2013, there was some success achieved that it came onto the table with establishment of Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. Yet, it was again a very soft intervention, which no mentions of any financial liability. 2015 Paris Climate Change Agreement was one forum where it was very ferociously contested by both sides. I was part of those negotiations, and I was incidentally negotiating on this particular article, and I'm witness to the verbal brawls between the developed and developing countries. There was a deadlock, and there was a time that the developed countries wanted it out of the climate change agreement. Yet it could find its place, and that was recognition of this fact that it emerged as a third pillar of the climate change negotiations after mitigation and adaptation. So it was a success in that respect. However, the developed countries were able to get a safeguard in this in form of getting a sentence included, which said so that while it has no financial implications, it dispenses away any aspects related to compensation and liability. Yet it was a success. And after that, still, the developed countries kept pursuing with their efforts. And I think so in COP27, these paid. Why in COP27? Because the sixth assessment report of Intergovernmental Panel on IPC, the IPCC's sixth assessment report had come in, which forecasted a very grim scenarios in the coming days, which also identified that adaptation has not been able to deliver, and there are a lot of gaps. And then there was a media awareness, there was advocacy from the public, and under pressure, the developed countries had to agree towards establishment of a fund. And incidentally, Pakistan was chairing the G77 at that time. A transition committee was established that got back in 2022, which had a balanced representations from the developed and developing countries, and it was given a specific mandate to suggest the operationalization of this fund. And as it happened that with exhaustive discourse last year over, 5 meetings, and then again, it was a lot of politics from both sides, a lot of push, that they were finally able to achieve on a consensus. And that document was presented in COP28. And it was a success, considered as a success. There was a token pledge of something like $700 million by different the developed countries. And this COP28, it was the first agenda point. Right at the beginning of it, it accepted it. So now we have a decision. This decision is yet to be notified, but with that, this decision gives out the governing instruments related to the operationalization of this loss and damage fund. It's a new fund which has come in, and I'll just, give you some salience of this fund, because when I need to talk about its future, it's very important that you actually need to know what it is about. This fund is going to be established as a legal entity, and it's also going to have its legal capacity. Its objective and scope, as I told you earlier, because the negotiations are about terms, phrases, sentences. While I gave you a definition about the loss and damage, it's imperative to know that how do we actually define loss and damage, and what are the reasons that we actually, attribute it to it. So there is a common understanding that while loss is something which is not recoverable and damage is something which is repairable and recoverable, they are of two categories, that is economic and non-economic. And the economic is something which can be quantified, and non-economic cannot be quantified. And they could happen both from the extreme events like the cyclones, the floods, or the slow onset events like, the ocean acidification, sea level rise, etc. So it was important from the developing countries' perspective that these objectives of this fund should be all encompassing and must even take into account all these aspects. So the objective and scope which were approved was that it is for all the developing countries which are particularly vulnerable to climate change. It covers both the economical and non-economical losses, and it covers both extreme and slow onset events. It can be used for any type of climate emergencies arising out of the effects of climate change, displacements, the dignified relocations, addressing the impacts of slow onset events, the mid to long-term reconstruction, even rehabilitations. So this is where it can be used. And this is going to be complementary to all the other humanitarian assistance which actually unfolds during the course of any disaster event. The fund is going to be governed by a board that is very important, because it's going to be like a corporate board comprising the professionals, and it will have 26 members. The 12 will be from the developed countries, and 14 will be from the developing countries. And amongst the developing countries, it covers all the regions, that is Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean. and then small islands like least developed countries. There are the different groups within the developing countries. And it's going to have a chair each from developed and developing countries. So that way, it's a very balanced composition, and you can see it has a pronounced, majority of somewhat a slim majority of the developing countries. The other aspect is that this fund is responsible for carrying out all the matters related. So, like in a corporate entity that you have a board of directors, you have a fund here which will start right from generating the funds to its allocation approvals. And this fund, this board, for its functioning would be getting all the approvals from conference of parties during their annual meetings. And it's also going to be accountable and reporting to the conference of parties. Now, the trustee for this fund, this was actually the aspect which delayed the which resulted into 5 meetings of transition committee. The trustee of this fund for an entire period of 4 years, World Bank. And it's going to host it in its secretariat. So this was done with a view that it should be, rapidly operationalized. And it's going to be a financial intermediary subject to certain conditions. These conditions had been insisted and included. So it's something which is a binding on an entity like World Bank. That it's going to be, the World Bank is going to, operate this fund as per approved governing instruments of the Conference of Parties, that is the decision of COP. There will be a full autonomy of Board of Governors to select and appoint its own executive director for the management of fund. It will have an access to all developing countries, whether they are members of World Bank or not. And World Bank have been allowed to invest these contributions, fund needs a growth. And it could receive the contribution from a wide number of sources. Now, having done this, this has to, and the World Bank is required to, operationalize it within next 8 months. That is, the COP finished on 13th of December, 2023. Within 8 months, it is supposed to operationalize it. Now, should the World Bank not be able to fulfill these conditions, because I just read out certain important ones, there are some others, then there are at least 3 set of, environment or situation in which they can do away with hosting it in World Bank. One is that if it does not agree to these conditions. Secondly, that during the performance, it is not able to, deliver at the end of 4 years period. It's not able to satisfactorily perform. And the third one is that within 6 months, if the bank does not inform the board that it is able to meet these conditions or not. In that case, they're going to be a standalone entity which could be hosted in any other country. Now, the funding which has to be designated, the fund identifies that it has to be a new source of funding which is predictable and which is additional to the funding which is already being used, like the humanitarian funding, the funding for disaster risk management, the funding for mitigation or adaptation. This is a very important aspect. And there would be a periodic replenishment of all this thing. Another important thing is that it identifies that the board will have to devise a mechanism that it is rapidly allocated and, allocated with automacy, because you all understand that as compared to the adaptation and mitigation, this is one aspect where the urgency is warranted. So with all this fund in place now, the fundamental question is that what is going to be the future of this fund? While I'm sure in a later part, we are going to dilate something about the climate finance, which already has a stream of green climate finance. It also has an adaptation fund, and the global stock take, I'm sure the House must have been made aware of, the situation is unfortunately not very good. Post 2015 to 2023, there are shortfalls in availability of funding and there are shortfalls in meeting the targets of adaptation and mitigation. And as we race towards 2030, the targets are revised, the ambitions are higher. So it still remains to be seen that whether those can be met or not. So under this environment, we have another fund in place, and it flows from the same, stream or same reservoir. An important thing which I just missed out was that in this fund, it has been very clearly written that the developed countries have been encouraged to provide the funding for loss and damage on voluntary basis. So there's no compulsion on them. Secondly, that by no means it is considered as a compensation or liability. So in a broad form, it's a concession document on a give and take basis by the both sides. So its hosting in a World Bank has advantages and also certain disadvantages. But then it is, all countered by a very balanced board where you find an opportunity that they should be able to push it forward. It's going to be operationalized in an environment when the assessment report 6 predicts and it forecasts that it is going to be because of the unadopted loss and damage. As I told you that loss and damage is unavoidable, it's a residual risk. But once we have not done enough adaptation, so that means there is something which is known as unadopted loss and damage. So it has accumulated, and we foresee that these events are going to increase as the AR6 predicts, and mostly it happens in almost those regions where the developing countries reside. So it's going to put a lot of premium on this fund when it's going to be. Secondly, there are we have to find it out that the aspect of additionality, that it's a new fund. So the report, Kashmala is an expert on climate finance, but the report, various reports about the climate finance predicts that there is a duplicity in the amount of finances which are coming. And whatever are committed by the developed nations, they're actually coming in the context of ODA. This is Overseas Development Grant, which is for, let's say, achieving a sustainable development, or it is the grant for humanitarian aid or the grant for DRR. So in the book debiting, they find it out that there is a duplicity, same grant is being used. So additionality is something important which will have to be focused by this board. But the money is not available, so there are talks of that you need to have some innovative financing. The innovative financing means that you generate the finance other than the finance which is available. It is fraught with an inherent danger because if it comes from a public, budget, it is guaranteed, it is predictable. But when you lean on to this thing that it's going to be generated through, having a windfall tax on the petroleum producing countries, or you're going to have some marine tax on the containers, or you're going to have some aviation tax, all those aspects, there's the predictable, it's not predictable and it's not guaranteed. But yet they will have to see that how they are going to meet that. Now, the next fundamental question is about the scale. There are various accounts that what is the need. The estimates coming from the countries and from the think tanks talks of 100 billion to 580 billion. They're variable, estimates. But even if you start with a floor value of 100 billion, so on the other side you have, the commitments for the climate finance amounting to adaptation fund for 100 billion, and you've not been able to meet that. So how it is going to be met? One should be optimistic that ways and means will have to be found that how these aspects are bridged. Then there are some fundamental aspects which are related to the financial instrument. What is all going to be used for? Is it going to be a loan or it's going to be a grant? A country like us would welcome a grant. But then, as it has been seen in green climate finance, whatever has been going on, it is through concessional loan. So the text, the governing instrument of this fund says so, that they're going to be highly concessional loans. It also talks of insurance, and it's a wide range. It has kept it open, a wide range of instruments from a grant to insurance to lending that they have talked of, and the board will decide about this. Now, who all gets it? So it's all the countries. So the problem with the other green climate finance is they accept it as, the accessibility. So here, while the thinking is that there has to be an automacy, a rapidness, that should you, put in for your demand, so you should be able to get that. But this is going to be one challenge that they'll have to do it. And linked to it is another challenge, that is the challenge of attribution. This is what the developed countries talk of, that whether an event which happened, is it attributed to climate change, or it is due to a long-term variation of climate itself. So this is where the science would come in, and this is where the, a judgment call will have to be. So some policies will have to be devised for it. And the next aspect is your claim, that is the assessment, the claim that you put in. And it happens that any country, that especially the developing countries, even in Pakistan, you have a problem of data. So once you don't have an established data, the claims are subjected to the human interference. And the quality of claim is always subject to a lot of scrutiny. So in a nutshell, it's this year, this next 8 months or so, that we are going to see formation of the Board of Governors, and we're going to see a meaningful, rollout of this fund. This is good that as compared to all the other funds which were established in the past, there was not that much urgency as it is seen now. So that is a good omen which is happening. And with the having, already taken certain decisions for a discussion for last 1 year, it is hoped that we could see the operationalization of this fund by the end of this year, after getting its approval from the next COP. But however, the fundamental aspect would still remain to be the availability of funding, that I'm sure in the future discourse, further discourse, that we will talk of. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Asghar Saab, for actually laying out the journey that we collectively undertook from loss and damage not being allowed to be on the agenda to right now, today, about 12, 13 years later, where we actually have a loss and damage fund. Granted, it has operational challenges. You mentioned the difficulties, conditionalities that we are to face with the World Bank, as well as the other more strategic questions around who has to pay into the pot, because at the moment it says developed and developing countries in a position to do so may. So the conversation is still open in terms of where the actual, where does the buck stop in terms of who puts money in here. So there are strategic challenges, there are operational challenges, but at the end of the day, what I take away from the journey that you helped us understand is if there's a will, there's a way, right? It seems like this is a one-way street where the developed countries are just talking to developing countries in a lot of different aspects and different multilateral systems. That's how we think it works. But when it actually comes to conversations within the climate sphere, it's slightly different. We punch above our weight when it comes to Pakistan in these negotiations. We can punch further above our weight if we work collectively as voices together from the region, together collectively where we have similar issues. So for me, this entire process has been really helpful and really heartening, and it gives me confidence that when you engage in these international processes and procedures, you actually find the right footholds for the people of your country who are actually being impacted by the impacts of climate change. So I really appreciate how this is being laid out. And of course, going forward, there are challenges of allocation. There are challenges. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges. But that doesn't mean that we continue to support the direction that we're taking on this internationally. I now slightly want to change the gears from a public loss and damage adaptation perspective and move on to you, Ms. Zehra, more around the who's actually had a lot of experience, who's actually from the private sector. Currently, she's the lead consultant, sustainability and climate change at Ernst & Young. And she's also been the director for ESG and sustainability at K Electric, British Tobacco Company, KFC, Chevron, and other such illustrious sectors that she's already worked in. The private sector, to the financial resilience, where do we stand? What's our credibility in the system, and how do we actually pull in? Because that's where the money is. The public sector has limitations, we all know, and Pakistani public sector has limitations like no other. How do you help us talk to a constituency that's currently sitting outside the climate debate?
And I would like to thank IRS as well for giving me this opportunity. I've actually put together a small presentation. I would like to use the podium.
Sure, absolutely.
Climate resilience finance, from the perspective of Pakistan, is all about adaptation finance. And if we talk about adaptation finance, it is basically progress on global standards negotiation in the elected to the idea of adaptation finance, and then increasingly linked progress on loss and damage finance, which may very covered very extensively. By developing institutional adaptation finance commitments that are ambitious, specific, credible, coordinated, and reasonable, public and private institutions can increase momentum towards that adaptation finance mobilization at scale. Debt, right now, as far as adaptation finance is concerned, remains the primary financial institution for all developing countries. We're always there. As I think it was covered in the previous session as well, that Pakistan, as far as adaptation is concerned, always presents the victim face. But I think things are changing, and we all know that the debt financial model is going to soon change. The loss and damage fund is very much there, but the commitment is $700 million. So from that perspective as well, and the operational conditionalities which are there are very, very, I would say, pertinent as well. So that gives us an indication that debt financing is going to actually diminish over the years. To close the gap between current adaptation flows and the needs of countries, a wide range of financial adaptation approaches are required that are currently being deployed at scale worldwide as well. And adaptation is intertwined with humanitarian aid, and it has to be a coordinated action on both, which is going to be effective. It cannot be verticals operating in different scenarios. We have to have the climate theme built in any project, any action which is humanitarian, in order to get that overall results which we are looking for. We cannot ask for humanitarian aid separately and for climate adaptation separately. It has to come together. Climate has to become the cross-cutting theme of every project. and increased coordination and collaboration between several stakeholders working on these projects have to increase, basically. 2023 Global Landscape of Climate Finance indicates that developing countries will need approximately 212 billion per year in adaptation finance up to 2030, and approximately 239 billion up to 2050. UNEP Adaptation Gap Report, I would like to refer to that, says that developing countries in this decade are likely to be between, need approximately 130 to 415 annually, and projected to rise significantly by 2050, as indicated. There are certain key sectors which are being focused as far as adaptation gap report is concerned, and they're talking about water, agriculture, and ecosystem as the nexus of all these finances. 700 million pledge to loss and damage fund at COP28 covers less than 0.2%, which is needed. So debt financing, as I said, are not the solution. If we talk about climate finance instruments in which both public and private stakeholders are being mobilized, number one, obviously, for Pakistan, you're always looking forward to grants, green bonds, concessional finance, carbon markets, equity, debt swaps, and guarantees. These are the instruments which are being used worldwide. Most of the climate funding has been for mitigation, not adaptation overall. So a focus, and even in COP28, a lot of developing countries were trying to focus on adaptation fund rather than mitigation, because for us, adaptation is, I would say, crucial. The private sector first moved on the market, so that adaptation enjoy a distinct first mover advantage. Over the last few years, private sector has applied many models. And I would say in this regard, the global south stands to benefit from much of the different instruments which are being implemented. Climate adaptation companies can include anything from food defense to cyclone early warning systems, to fintech and supply chain companies. So we see this overall sector being developed. When we are doing a specific adaptation project, we are also creating a green climate market for the global south. The private sector is eventually interested in growing that market, and also in investing in the instruments which are being deployed. Some of the examples I could fetch was Captain Fish, an Indian seafood supply chain company, with approximately 126 million in funding. There are many fintech which are working to support communities, basically. So this, as a sector, is emerging. The overall, there are many markets where we now hear that carbon stock exchange and green bond for adaptation finance is proving to be a successful model as well. I was privileged to attend COP28, and I attended many sessions specifically on climate finance and on carbon stock exchanges as well. Singapore right now is leading in this specific model, and they are creating a carbon stock exchange. Europe is also leading in this, and this instrument is now at a very advanced level as far as those markets are concerned. I would say at COP28, the Pakistan traction and the momentum was very much there. was very much present. And I was a very proud Pakistani to attend that conference because we all talked about the gaps. And in the last session as well, we were talking about the policy gaps. We were talking about, I would say, the integration gap. But as far as the little island of excellence which we have created, they have become exemplary models for the world to replicate, basically. Out of the 4 sessions on adaptation finance, in 3 of them, Pakistan was actually mentioned. Specifically, the National Adaptation Plan was mentioned, which is a very, very, I would say, comprehensive adaptation plan and focuses on the need for strategies to attract climate finance, engage the sector, and ensure sustainable funding in the long run. So it's a very realistic plan as far as my humble analysis of it is concerned. The Sindh flood housing reconstruction project. And EY is one of the consultants as far as this project is concerned. We are very proud consultants of this project. It is one of the fastest, I would say, rehabilitation project. And out of 2 million houses which World Bank has funded, and the funding was approved in October 2022. We have already built approximately 300,000 houses. And this is a great example of community being engaged and community actually taking forward the rebuilding process. And the ownership of the land is given to the woman member of the household with a focus on financial inclusion and education. They are actually leading climate talks. They're actually leading what they need in their specific communities. And they're matching through their own funds a lot of resources which are needed to rebuild these communities. We are not just building houses, we are replanning communities for them. There is a specific focus on infrastructure. There is a specific focus on microgrids, solar energy. There's a specific projects. There is a specific focus on creating a green built industry as well around this project. So as I said, private sector can be engaged through various ways. One adaptation project can engage many private players in a project. And that is what this exemplary project is all about. The Indus Delta Blue Mangroves Project. Last year, Pakistan earned 40 million through this project. One of a kind, started by the Sindh Forest. Basically, it is one of a kind because we never thought that we have that kind of potential in mangroves. But the kind of momentum we saw last year showed us the kind of potential it has. They're aiming at a sale of approximately 100 million worth of carbon credits this year. And the Indus Delta 2, which is being launched this year as well, is projecting approximately a target of 12 billion in sales by 2075. And this is just one project through which Pakistan can get this kind of revenue. We have go back. I had a word with Bilal Saab during the lunch session, and I was talking about green bonds. And he said there are many hindrances. We don't have actually a proper framework. SECP has actually given us a framework around green bonds, and Sushma must be knowing about it. And Pakistan, WAPDA, Pakistan Water and Power Development Authority, issued $5 million worth of green bonds in 2021. which was basically to fund their hydroelectric project. Um, renewable energy category finance or refinance the development, expansion or refurbishment of assets that generate hydropower, wind energy, are basically part of the framework which WADA has created around the green bond. Climate change adaptation category finance or refinance technology supporting flood control and prevention measures are also part of this. SSCP has also launched, as I said, green bond guidelines. State Bank of Pakistan has also launched specific guidelines around them. Leading and some examples, as I said, we have created certain island of excellence. The private sector is also very, very active as far as green bonds are concerned. One of the leading Pakistan textile manufacturer issued green bonds worth PKR 5 million as well, to actually invest on wastewater treatment plants. We have the example of Anglo solar plants as well, and the project actually got specific climate financing against the carbon credit. Indirect, but we recently, Infragarment recently launched the first ever gender bond in South Asia. I actually mentioned the gender bond in one of the talks I was giving in COP28, and around about 20 people surrounded me just to know about this gender bond. I have given out details of the bond to many African colleagues. Many Asian countries as well are aiming to actually, issue this bond. The fund was raised basically to give microfinance to approximately 30,000 women. And the line, then again, as I said, the cross-cutting of each project which we are doing has to be climate. So the cross-cutting theme of this fund is also climate. Gender and climate are the force which are going to actually take the climate talk forward. In NDMRF, we are working with them to actually have a framework for overall carbon market. And there is an opportunity every mitigation and adaptation project that we are doing to create those carbon market as well. Pakistan agri-based startups can also pivot towards a carbon market. So if everyone integrates, comes together, and we have a proper framework, Pakistan has, I would say, a huge potential as far as carbon market is concerned. Recharge Pakistan, COP28, I think this was the flagship project which Pakistan presented. Then again, a very, very good example of public and private partnership. We have Coca-Cola Foundation investing in this. MOCC and WWF are also partners. And a specific project which will, inshallah, recharge Pakistan, because it is basically establishing the cost effectiveness benefits of sustainability of the ecosystem-based adaptation of green irrigation and interventions in the Indus Basin. Pakistan is basically leading the South Asia adaptation efforts. The kind of, I would say, sales pitch we have provided, and I would give a lot of credit to Sherry Rahman for this as well. The kind of sales pitch and the presentation she did for Pakistan, I think now we are leading the South Asian dialogue for adaptation. And if we combine the kind of potential we have, we integrate and we synergize the efforts, I think we can build momentum to build a very resilient Pakistan as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zara, for that outlay. What you said in the end really caught my eye, coordinated efforts, and we need to align. Last night we were at dinner and you were talking about climate change and conflict, and someone spoke about institutional conflict. I thought that was quite a good way of framing it around who needs to do what. And the more we realize that climate change is not one ministry's issue or one institution's issue, it has to be coordinated. Only yes, you are doing the examples that you just gave here, a few that I actually want to pull out for a little more context, is really about us going in the right direction. And if we're able to put the parts together, the sum is absolutely more than the parts that we have. So that's just one reflection. The second really was I was happy to see that the examples from the private sector were mostly on the adaptation side. You spoke about adaptation finance. Generally, the private sector is all about revenue and return. They always want to focus in that area. But the few examples that you actually gave here was an indication that the adaptation conversation can also be revenue return, can be an R&R conversation. So the delta, that's one of my favorites. That's the one I quote internationally as well. It's just a mangrove project. You've planted those over there, but then you did it in a systematic way because your vision was to hit the carbon market. So you ensured that the additionality, the permanence, all the elements that you require from a carbon market internationally, you align all of your interventions in that direction. So again, an example of adaptation done right, where you're actually also generating revenue ultimately at the end of the day.
I just want to add one. See, until unless we give value, tangible value to the world will not invest. I think being the fifth most affected country in the world, the markets which developed countries want to invest in, they are all basically the victim countries. But at the end of the day, if we give them value, and it has to be transactional value, only then will it make sense to them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, of course, speaking of values, the green bond, the WABDA green bond, which was oversubscribed 5 times. For the 500 million, we were able to raise 2.5 billion in that one day that we launched it. That again, regardless of our overall macroeconomic situation, it was just 2 years ago that we were able to raise the kind of money that we did, because there are pockets and then there are islands of good work that we're doing, and we just need to put it together in the right way. You spoke about startups. It's not just connecting startups to the carbon market, but it's also getting the startups to look for climate solutions, which ultimately puts you in an exportable place where ultimately you are exporting climate action solutions, whether it's adaptation or mitigation, because that's where the brains are, that's where the discussion is. And then, of course, InfraZamin, I'll come to that separately, where generally our conversation when we speak about financial instruments is only between loan and a grant. Grant aa raha hai ki loan aa raha hai. Loan hai to kitna concessional hai. We're too, wo कहते हैं कि हमारे पर जलते हैं to actually look at other financial instruments. InfraZamin is coming in to support, to use guarantees as a financial instrument, which obviously has a completely different dimension when it comes to raising other private finance. So good one that we need to look out for. Sir, I'll move to you. S.N. Gilani Saab, who is now the investment expert with UNIDO. Very, very illustrious career again. He's a seasoned banker with a lot of expertise in trade finance. We spoke around the direction that the public sector is trying to take care of, more around the loss and damage, resilience, adaptation, supporting side. And then we also spoke about the private sector's interest in doing more of the same. Given your expertise around the public-private partnerships, could you just help us understand where the opportunity lies in Pakistan sectorally? Where are the opportunities and what are we not seeing properly?
Thank you very much, Assalamualaikum, everybody. Thank you for inviting me for this such an educating forum, and thank you, Krismala, for such a good introduction. Let's see. Let me just quickly give you a quick background on what's happening. being a part of UNIDO and being a banker, I could just combine the two and talk about financing challenges which we have in raising financing for climate change. I don't need to give you numbers. My colleagues here and this institute is very active in giving you numbers and statistics. But a quick, simple question is that $346 billion is needed for Pakistan to tackle this climate crisis between 2023 to 2030. And so far, we have received $300 million only. Now, I ask you, very learned people, how do we cover up the gaps? Yes, we are looking towards our friends to give us grants. We are talking to international donors to give us money. We are raising debt from the donors, but that debt we have to pay back at an exorbitant rate of return. These grants, we are not the only one, as my colleagues have mentioned very quickly. The kitty is very small, and there is a lot of aspirants to get that do that grant. So, what do we do? So, we should rely on our own resources. Now, let's coming back to what Kishmara has asked, public-private partnership in terms of financing. Now, we do understand that we have challenges in terms of our economy. Our economy has seen one of the worst times in the last 2 years. We had socio-political problems, which were a little harder than what we had anticipated. So that all has shattered the confidence of the donor into Pakistan. One basic thing is that being a big part of UNIDO and negotiating with donors. So the first question is that, okay, we want to come to Pakistan. We want to give you money. We want to give you a loan for climate change. Who do we talk to? Who will give us the guarantee of next 5 years or 3 years or 2 years or tenure of the funding we're going to give you? Because at the moment you have an interim government. So in terms of investment, equity investment, in terms of flow of money in Pakistan, we had the toughest drought ever in last 6 months. I'm being part of that conversation. I'm being part of that force because within my portfolio, I have 48 projects which are fintech startup in climate change arena, in EV, in RE, in agriculture, in gender, and they're all into mitigation. And I know how hard it is for me to raise funding. Now, the only source of funding at the moment which comes to you in mind as a layman is go to a bank and raise debt. Our private banks, one, they don't have the liquidity. Two, who is going to raise funds as a fintech or the climate change startup who is coming to a new arena, who is not a textile manufacturer, who is not the Manchas or the Malik Riaz of this country, who are just starting up a new concept or new entity to promote climate change and save environment. Who's going to lend them? Your banks will not lend them because we have a very superficial, rather tough risk criteria to in which banks lend. Other than that, banks are very shy to give money to startups and fintech, especially climate change, because it's an unknown arena for them. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is using my experience, using my jargon, my influence, I can convince a bank to lend you. Who is going to borrow at 22% plus the bank charge, that 27% of financing? Going to a climate change program or an organization which is doing EV, which is an unknown phenomenon in this country, unfortunately, which is doing renewable energy at a smaller level, which is going to process the rice husk into biomass and give clean energy, which we were initially burning and contributing towards environment hazard. So this is one part of the story. Now let's talk about public sector financing. State Bank of Pakistan has its own challenges. We had seen a time when the trade was impossible because LC will not be opened or will not be honored because because State Bank had lower deposits. So your solar energy and your hydro energy, your solar industry and your hydro industry, who depends on these turbines and exports and imports, could not raise funding, and all those projects got shelved, and lot of money, got wasted. Now, within that framework comes in the donors. Donor again are your friends to an extent when they can show some return on their investment. Okay, even your grants are at the level where you have to compete with them, as I told you, and whatever grant you get is not enough for you to take you through. At some point in your debt or a helping hand. So having said that, that's a scenario. Having said that, we have what I've experienced is that Government of Pakistan, along with State Bank, has 6 SME concession financing schemes. That is what public sector at the moment is contributing. But these schemes are for different sectors like the rice gas farming, like the vegetable and agriculture, like solar. And these schemes are offered to you at 3% to 6% return, which is a very good scenario. But again, unfortunately, those limits have not been refurbished by State Bank, and they are now available in the commercial banks on a room basis. If you have a limit of around 100 million assigned to you by State Bank under these schemes, which are concessional financing, you can only use it if you have room available in that, because there are no fresh limits available from State Bank. So you have a bottleneck there as well. Now then comes our small venture capitals like Karandaz, like the Indus Valley, who have funding available from FMO or DFID or the likes of the other donors, which are available to you at a lower rate. Again, how do you mitigate the currency risk? You have dollar financing, you're earning rupees. How do you match? So these are challenges in terms of financing, which we have faced and which we are facing. Having said that, we have, as UNIDO, as donors, have come to different platforms where we have brought State Bank, XCDP, and the donors together to work out a mechanism where the concession financing is available to these climate change programs, especially in the next climate change. As I said, the EV, gender, agriculture, renewable energy, and others. And now, in those schemes, we are working with State Bank to put in some sort of an document out where it will ensure the hedging of US dollar and reputation and the Pak rupee. Plus, we are also talking to these donors to come in and lend in rupees. Now, when they lend in rupees, the applicable rate becomes the Kaiber rate, again, which is not workable. So what we have done with USAID and others is to come with about a phenomena where public-private partnership will now offer concession financing within 10% and less to these climate change programs. Green Pakistan 2025 vision and Green Pakistan 2030 vision states very clearly, which we have signed in the SDGs, that we will have 25% of the energy will be green. And by 2030, it will be 30 to 40% green energy. When you have 12 wind powers working very, very accurately, flawlessly, but there's no evacuations, because of the fact that we still have an entire government and they don't really see they don't really get the direction, and we are still evacuating the energy from 18 to 20 rupees per unit from the fossil fuels. When you have solar power available, when you have wind energy available, so that's one challenge we have to convince the regulator to start evacuating from those wind farms, because we have around 24 wind farms available with 50 megawatt each. That's 1200 megawatt energy available to you with no energy payments, only capacity payments. So it goes with, the same goes with solar. Then we have the hydros. Now, the fact that we were able to bring the public and the private partners together, the State Bank and the CP and the public entities and these donors, and establish the likes of Karandaz and Indus Valley, is that we see the need of these challenges, we see the need that these challenges have to be addressed. Otherwise, we will go towards a disaster. We will hit a disaster. You are all based out of Pakistan. Most of us have seen the climate change you experienced. Previously, the snow used to be this summer, January, and by the time it's summer, your snow is converted to glacier. So you have water. You have a water is available. Now It snows in February, March. By the time it starts to convert to a glacier, there's already summer. The snow melts. You have floods early. The climate change in Islamabad, I've been living in Islamabad for a very long time. I have not seen such a big drought in Islamabad in all my life. It's not rained for 2 months. So, for this specific challenge, what we have done and what we are doing is to bring the public sector, State Bank, LCP, to have flexible policies, and the donor, which is the FMO, the Fed, USAID, and other UN, to come in with donors to give to route financing towards Pakistan in the climate change area. So at the moment, we have successful financing available from State Bank. We have successful financing available from Andaz and the likes of Indus Valley at 6 to 9% for climate change. Public sector was at the moment only supporting us with SME schemes with State Bank, which are available in the banks but are not refurbished due to the scarcity of the capital. So that part of the funding will also be compensated by these donors at conventional rates. But having said that, to enter and to achieve this target of 2025 and 2030, a lot needs to be done to cover that gap, either through public sector banks and public sector financing, the green bond. My colleague rightly said there is no regulation with State Bank of Pakistan for green bonds. There is a regulation, but it's not a presidential regulation yet, which makes it regulated to issue a green bond. SCP has done a marvelous job, and they have supported some initiative of that sort, but still a lot has to be done. All your asset management companies are now working towards energy bonds. They're working towards green funds, which will raise money to invest in green funds. There's a revolution in terms of mutual fund industry in supporting this initiative, again led by the donors. That almost all AMCs are now working on the energy fund or a green fund or a gender fund, which will only support these initiatives. So, overall, that's what we have done in as a donor, as the United Nations, to bring these two entities together to face the challenge, because we have to start relying on our own resources. We have to start structuring our own bonds and financial institutions to support this effort, and not rely on the grants and the debts from the friends and overseas, and especially from the donors, from the multilaterals, because that will cost us in the coming years, which cost might not be able to bear.
Thank you so much, Yasin. Thank you. Challenges first, and then helping us understand how there are certain programs which are now cropping up to actually plug in the financing problems that various sectors are facing. I'm going to now open the floor for questions, about 15 minutes or so. Please identify yourself and then ask one crisp question. So can we have the mic here and then in the back?
My name is Salim Khan, and thank you very much for the very powerful and wonderful presentation by the panelist. Despite having all those great projects through public-private partnerships and some other means, I would like to emphasize on the public spending on climate finance. And if you see the 2023-2024 budget, we have just put 1.2 billion PKR for environment and climate response, which is like spending 5 rupees per citizen per year. So despite all these public-private sector initiatives, and despite that, the political will is there, and we have very strong leaders like Sharee Rahman, who have led developing some of the great document like National Adaptation Plan. So my question is to Major General Saab that with this meager support from public resources, how we can get the best out of the document like National Adaptation Plan, and how we can best implement such a beautiful document into practice. Thank you.
Then come back to the panel.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you to all the panelists for that enlightening session. My name is Waleed Liaquat. I'm currently working with an NGO called Human Development Foundation. So my question is, Zahra mentioned in her presentation, Recharge Pakistan. It took 7 years for Recharge Pakistan to be approved by the GCF board. So in your experience, and this is open to all of you, in your experience, what is lacking on Pakistan side? I know Asghar Saab spoke about the lack of data, but there's plenty of data, there's plenty of research to say that Pakistan has a strong case for, loss and damage and all of that, and even climate financing. So what else is the issue that you feel on the international stage and in these grand scheme of things that Pakistan and other developing countries have a hard time securing climate finance, and it takes so long for projects like these to get approval? And in only 2024, we are going to see some movement on Recharge Pakistan. And if you start applying now, it will be 2030 before we get another project of this kind. So yeah, that's my question.
Thank you. Homa Fakhr, I'm from the private sector. I'm an exporter. Thank you to all the panelists. And my question is to Ehsan Saab. Thank you so much for all the list of projects that you gave. I was wondering, as a donor, is there a list or a study which highlights what are the bankable projects in relation to adaptation which are indigenous to Pakistan?
For each panelist, sir, if I can start with you and then go down the line.
Thank you very much. Public sector budget is something which is very interesting. So while what you have indicated, the amount which is specifically meant related to environment and climate change pertains to maybe, I don't know the details of that, but it may be pertaining to some specific interventions, projects. We must understand that all the sectors have an inherent component of climate spending. The financing that we are doing for the dams, the construction of dams, the financing that we are doing in the agriculture for smart agriculture, all these things, they are by default a hidden investment or financing towards the climate resilience. You also recall that IMF had also put on certain restriction, the specific restriction on government of Pakistan that for all future budgetary considerations, there has to be a distinct, presence of that whatever is being spent, because they want that whatever money is given by them, and especially they are in the development portfolio, has to ensure a climate resilient infrastructure. So that is one part of it. Now, we need to be talking of getting the fundings or the grants, looking at the grants, or for that matter, the loans to move forward. But we need also to adopt a self-reliant approach at the country level. The innovative financing that I talked of, this aspect is very much applicable in our country. We need to, when I was chairman NDMA, that we pursued with the government that at least 2% of the annual development budget must be reserved for disaster risk management. So in every scheme, otherwise also in every project, you have about 1% contingency charges, and there are always savings. So if you have, so you create a pool of funds. We have been paying in the electric bill for the salary of the PTV. Why can't we have such measures? Myself, yourself, we just contribute 100 rupees, we can generate the funds. So we need to actually think of, and I agree with you that at the level of government and like what she said, so in case of mitigation and adaptation, you will find out if you are able to sell well, you're able to find out the projects which can invite a public-private partnership because there are returns involved in that. The energy project, for that matter, have the returns, and there are so many others. Even in Pakistan, we have an energy project, a hydro-based energy project based on the same concept. So we can always look forward to that, but I agree with you, we need to actually enhance that, and then when you do that, it is sellable.
To the list of what can be counted as climate finance, absolutely 100% agree with Asghar Saab around. It's not just the project. The other day we were at NDU discussing similar issues, and somebody raised a very good point around the fact that currently jo Lahore mein humidifiers log khareed rahe hain, that's your own money that you're spending to adapt to the climate that is changing around you. But we don't consider that. So there's that layering that needs to happen to understand what we are actually domestically raising to address the issues. So yeah, in addition, there's also privately money that we're spending. Yes, Zara, over to you.
Answering your question, I think what Pakistan lacks right now is just one word: integration, creating synergies. We want to attract a lot of renewable projects. We've all heard about the potential of Jamshedpur corridor. And there is right now the capacity at Jamshedpur is approximately 1,000 megawatts. There is no transmission line. So we want to attract renewable projects, but we don't want to lay down the transmission network. And right now we're just paying capacity costs. The kind of capacity costs each consumer, and because my background is utility and energy, I would like to, the kind of the capacity costs which you are paying right now in your bills is approximately 30%. So that's the cost. So until and unless we synergize our planning, we're not going to get that kind of momentum. I talked about the potential, but it is just integration. The World Bank has given 200,000 solar panels to a specific ministry. They want to give those panels to jhuggis. They don't want to give those panels to newly constructed houses. So it's a battle. Until and unless we integrate, we synergize, we have a platform, and I hope the National Adaptation Plan provides that platform. We will do a lot of good work in silos, but we will never get the synergies. We will never be able to convince the donors that, yes, they are all doing it together, and eventually they are going to deliver. So I think for me, it is just one word. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, madam. देखिए, traditionally bankable projects जो हैं पाकिस्तान में वही हैं आपके wind, solar, because the wind corridor is bankable now. Solar penetration, solar जो है penetration in Quetta, Balochistan and the Cholistan, it's bankable because the region is bankable. Now, coming to your question, what we have experienced in last year or so, that plastic circulation is now bankable. If you are working in a plastic circulation where you are getting plastic and recycling it, that's bankable. EV is now become very bankable. Suddenly, overnight, I don't know what happens to the bank. We've been convincing them for a year, but I think that maybe our convincing was not good enough. But overnight, every bank is now doing EV, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, and most of all, gender-led, ladies-led projects are now very much bankable. Because State Bank of Pakistan is now introducing a regulation with the appropriate Ministry of Finance that now in every board of a bank, every board of a local corporate or a multinational, there should be a director who should be green financing compliant and gender compliant. So these are the three avenues which we have experienced in my experience that which have become bankable in addition to the traditional solar, wind, and hydro. There's the plastic circulation, EV, and the ladies' projects. That answer your question?
Thank you very much, Yasin. I'll come back to the floor to see if there's one final round of questions that anyone may have. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's working. Well, it's really been quite educating and informative, the presentations that have been made by all of you. In social conversations, what I have heard mostly is about natural and unnatural disasters. So what we noticed in the flood 2022, certain infrastructure was destroyed as a result of encroachments or settlements on the river banks. And now, will there be any differentiation between these two insofar as damage assessment is concerned?
I think that's that's the bane of all issues at the UNFCCC negotiations. How much do you attribute to climate change and how much do you attribute to governance issues in our countries? The issue of attribution is a big one. Maybe Aswar Saab wants to tackle this, given that the Loss and Damage Fund is trying to.
Thank you, ma'am. Natural disasters. The DRR, UN DRR puts it like that. They're no natural disaster. They're natural hazards which are converted into disaster because of the human activity. And the case like, especially in Pakistan, in the waterways, people are living. So that is one, it's a governance issue. And of course, the second aspect is the poverty and certain compulsions that it happens. So I'll put forward to that in such like cases, what I told you that attribution, the lens of attribution is going to have, a lot of parameters. So one parameter would also be that of vulnerability and exposure and the governance. That could it have been averted? And the country which should be asking for putting forth a claim will have to justify it. Because like in Pakistan case, we take on the population which is now living in Kachas, in the waterways. And unfortunately over there, even an infrastructure has also been created with the public spending. In order to displace them, it also has a cost. This comes in the context of whether you called it adaptation or you called it a disaster risk management, but it has a cost. So if it is done by the government and which is insured, so maybe, the disaster does not happen.
Thank you very much, Ji. We have a question here, please.
Thank you. I'm Janul Raza, I'm DG ISRA. In fact, most of the questions have been answered because ISRA also conducted a roundtable conference, especially on this subject, climate finance, about 2 weeks back. Ms. Kashmala was there. But I was intrigued by the comment made by Ms. Zehra, where you said that Pakistan is probably a leader in South Asia, or it is leading the efforts in terms of adaptation or whatever. What we learned in our, it was because I'm not an expert, that in past 1 year or maybe 2021, 22, India and Bangladesh were able to attract more, funding for climate change as compared to Pakistan. So once we talk, especially vis-a-vis climate finance, so how do you say that we are the leaders? Leaders in what context, number one? And number two, you made a very important point especially for me, I would say, once you said that synergy that is lacking. Or synergy agar aapki ho, or silos mein kaam na kare, so what do you suggest 1 or 2 years to achieve that synergy? Or jis tarah aapne baat ki ke probably we don't have a single, focal point. So is not the Ministry of, Climate Change the focal point here but otherwise आपकी नजर में synergy हासिल करने के लिए, because it's a cross cutting problem, it's not only a climate change issue. लेकिन अगर आप सिर्फ climate change के एंगल से बात करें तो synergy achieve करने के लिए क्या वो 2-3 steps हैं which we should do, and how do you justify saying कि जी हम lead कर रहे हैं South Asia?
If, from my aspect, it was a comment because, as I said, I was present at COP28, and wherever it was, there was a talk on adaptation. I think in 80% of the talks, Pakistan was quoted as an exemplary example. So that was one aspect. And I would say 2 or 3 projects which are being done by World Bank, they were also showcased. No doubt, Bangladesh and India has the potential. They're very much out there. But even for the loss and damage fund, the kind of argument and overall, I would say the battle which Pakistan actually went through, it actually worked for the South Asian region. So it's a, I would say it's a comment. I can't actually back it up by data because obviously India and Bangladesh have been out there. But having said that, Pakistan also has a place on the map right now. And I would say it's a very respected nation as far as adaptation is concerned. And that's the perception I got. And I had various discussions with ADB representatives, with the World Bank representative as well, and quite a few ministers of different countries. So that's one comment. As far as synergies are concerned, I just gave you one example. Climate cannot be owned by one ministry. I'm sorry. It is a cross-cutting theme. It has to be part and parcel of each and every ministry now, you know. So it cannot be a theme which is owned by one ministry. We need to have a platform. We need to have some kind of synergic background where a platform where everyone can come together and synergize the resources. As I said, we want to attract clean energy investment, but we don't have the transmission lines. So if we don't plan for transmission, how can we attract I would say they can lead it, but I would say there is this planning commission now. There are many other ministries. So I would not actually, it's just a advice that everyone should come together, basically.
I cannot answer your question because I faced this predicament. This is a public sector governance issue. And it has compounded more so after the 18th Amendment. Because when these subjects are devolved and the provinces are somewhat independent in this coordination predicament exists. One, that within the federal government, there is no robust mechanism for inter-ministries coordination. Similarly, while you have a climate change ministry here, in the provinces, especially in the small provinces, it should be the same hierarchy which should follow, and it has to actually go and transcend right up to the district level. So that is how this complete chain has to, but this does not exist. We have very good policies. We have got very good plans, and of course, they do not get implemented. The second aspect, the provincial governments and the federal government in a fragmented manner get engaged with the multilateral institutions. So while you have a canvas and a roadmap at the National Adaptation Plan, if you are meeting certain goals, objectives, and interventions related to that, that should be coherently coordinated at federal level. So you must know where the funding is coming. I found out during my year here in India, and I took a stock take of the efforts which had been, investment financing, which had come into the realm of disaster risk management. And the figures were, quite like community-based disaster risk management done by X NGO, Y NGOs same place, different times. So much money was coming. It was coming directly, the NGOs or the UN implementation partners or certain aid projects. So what she's saying so is right. If we have a complete, dashboard to see what is needed, it should be actually demand driven and not supply driven. So we can not only have an efficiency, we can have an economy, and we have a lot of money available which is wasted, and the priorities are not defined.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to add a little bit to this. Whenever we say we need to synergize, we need to come together, we need to coordinate. उससे पहले एक सवाल बनता है, what are we synergizing for? अगर मैं मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ फाइनेंस में इस वक्त चली जाऊं, या मैं EAD में चली जाऊं, या मैं MOCC को उसको साइड पे रखें, अगर उनसे मैं पूछूं कि आपका रोल क्लाइमेट फाइनेंस में पाकिस्तान के लिए क्या है, तो nobody will give me an answer. तो पहले हमने वो डिफाइन करना है कि इस वक्त अगेन एक साइड पे हम we're all very clear, there's absolute unambiguously we're all agreeing कि climate change this is across the board problem. फिर हम जाके उसको एक मिनिस्ट्री को सौंप देते हैं. उनका रोल जो होता है वो बड़ा स्पेसिफिक है इस वक्त. एज मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ क्लाइमेट चेंज इट होल्ड्स इट्स गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान सिग्नेटरी टू ऑल इंटरनेशनल ट्रीटीज एंड दैट्स अबाउट इट. उनका इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में कोई काम नहीं है. उनका बाकी IFIs के साथ, इंटरनेशनल एंटिटीज के साथ काम नहीं है. वो एनर्जी डिपार्टमेंट को डिक्टेट नहीं कर सकते कि उनका एनर्जी मिक्स क्या होना चाहिए. वो वापडा को नहीं डिक्टेट कर सकते कि या उनको नहीं बता सकते कि इनोवेशन किस तरफ लेके जानी. सो बिफोर वी कंटिन्यू, बिफोर वी आस्क द क्वेश्चन ऑफ हाउ वी नीड टू सिनर्जाइज, व्हाट डू वी नीड टू सिनर्जाइज ऑन, और उसके अंदर हर मिनिस्ट्री का रोल क्या है. इट्स वेरी इजी टू से कि क्लाइमेट चेंज इज एवरीवनस प्रॉब्लम, व्हिच बेसिकली मींस नोबडी इज गोइंग टू टेक रिस्पांसिबिलिटी फॉर इट, एंड दैट्स एग्जैक्टली व्हाट वी आर डूइंग ओवर हियर. तो जितना ज्यादा हम ग्रैन्युलर इस चीज में जाएंगे, उतना ही बेहतर क्लैरिटी आएगी in terms of whose role it is, and then there's no institutional conflict, so to speak, because I am absolutely 100% of the view that everyone has a very different role to play. Every ministry, provincially, federal level, provincially, district level, all the way to the local government, the roles are very different. तो अगर हम एक दूसरे का काम ना करें और पहले खुद आइडेंटिफाई करें कि in order to raise finances for the climate problem, and then obviously implement it in the right way as well. We have absorptive capacity issues as well. तो उसको address करने की ज़रूरत है. So thank you so much. We've had a very patient audience over here, and thank you to the panelists as well. It's been a wonderful opportunity to actually speak across the issues, not just from a climate finance perspective, but really layering it to the problems that we're seeing on ground. So thank you, and a round of applause to the panelists.